There is a sliver of time just before dawn, when the world forgets to breathe, when sound has not yet remembered where it belongs, and the air holds its stillness like a secret. In that suspended hush, you might feel the earth itself waiting. And it is there, between silence and first light, that this story begins. A faint wind drifts across empty fields, soft as a passing thought. It brushes the edges of abandoned roads, slips between the stones of quiet homes, and wanders gently through the fractured spaces left behind. Its touch is barely more than a sigh, yet within that subtle movement, the world begins to stir, just a little. Candle flames flicker in forgotten rooms, their glow faint, their shadows slow. They do not dance with urgency, they simply shiver with the rhythm of the air, as though they too are adjusting to the quiet. The heartbeat of the land moves with them, steady, low, patient. Not hurried, not anxious, simply present, like a companion sitting nearby. And then comes a voice, soft, woven into the dim light and the drifting wind, as if rising from the walls, from the earth, from memory itself. The world has fallen silent. The year is 1353, the bells have stopped tolling. The words fall lightly, no weight, no demand. They do not seek to stir fear nor sorrow, they simply settle into the air like dust. The passing of the plague is not announced with thunder. It is recalled the way one remembers the quiet after a storm, the washed sky, the damp soil, the calm mind. In this gentle telling, the plague is not a beast. It is a fading shadow, a night that has passed, a chapter turning itself. The storm is over, but its echoes linger, blurred, softened by time, as though viewed through a thin veil drawn between then and now. Across the land, villages once alive with voices now rest in a kind of peaceful hush. Doorways stand half open, neither welcoming nor warning. Windows mirror the pale sky. Streets lie under a thin coat of dust, softened by days of stillness. Edges have rounded, nothing feels sharp anymore. The air smells of change, subtle, fresh, unhurried. Grass appears along the edges of abandoned fields. Weeds rise through cobblestones. Wildflowers sway where hands once passed daily. Nature does not reclaim with force. She fills the empty space softly, like tending to wounds with patience and breath. The narrator continues, voice even quieter now, moving with the world's slow rhythm. They do not command attention, they drift beside the listener, inviting them to walk this quiet path without haste. They speak of the time after the storm, when sky feels new-washed, when earth is damp with memory, when light moves slowly, rediscovering familiar corners. Here, the past is not harsh. It lies far off, softened by fog, viewed through a lens of gentle reflection. The end of the plague is not framed in terror, but transition. A lifting weight, a horizon clearing. The bells that rang without rest now sit in silence, as though even metal breathes relief. Their quiet is not eerie, it is natural, like the world exhaling after holding itself rigid for too long. People have not returned fully to life. Footsteps a few, scattered, tentative, and yet the world is not as lonely as one might think. In silence, it has found balance. In stillness, it has found room to heal. The wind stirs again, brushes grass, bends the heads of wildflowers. The narrator's voice follows, flowing through the story like a soft current. They describe the last days of the plague as one might recount a fading dream, not to relive it, but simply to acknowledge that it once was. They speak of homes closed for the last time, not with panic, but with quiet resolve. Empty streets where footsteps thinned, then vanished, leaving only wind behind, candles burning through long nights, marking time in small circles of light. And then a morning like any other, except the world feels different. Lighter, yes, emptier, but open like a blank page touched by a first word. The plague loosened, the fear thinned like mist. The long shadow drifted away, not with drama, but with a sigh. The narrator's tone never sharpens. It does not rise or drop. It flows, steady as a lantern at dusk. They speak not of sorrow, but of the stillness after it. The calm that follows a long night. That quiet knowing that the world, though changed, continues. The wind falls softer. The land's heartbeat slows. Candlelight grows steady. Everything reflects the unraveling of tension. The tone is not mournful, it is cleansing, like rain rinsing dust from stone. As minutes stretch, the narration expands. Sentences unspool. Pauses linger, like deep breaths. The listener is not urged to feel, only to be here in this soft, unhurried world. The narrator speaks of resilience without naming it, of endurance without applause, of memories settling into earth like leaves into soil, quietly, naturally, feeding whatever will someday grow there. The story does not push. It drifts. And the listener drifts with it, carried by the gentle pulse of words and the muted hum of wind. Softly, like a final exhale of meditation, the narrator returns to the beginning. The world has fallen silent, and in that silence, something new begins to take shape. It has no name, no form. It simply rests like a seed beneath soil, gathering patience to bloom. The wind quiets, the candles steady. The earth's pulse deepens, no rush, no shift. Only calm, and the beginning of something tender. A cleansed world waiting for dawn. The fading echo. A distant church bell drifts through the mist, its echo stretched thin by the quiet air. It does not call or warn, it simply lingers, fading slowly into the soft grey around it. The sound rises once, then dissolves, leaving behind a stillness that seems to rest lightly over the land. The narrator's voice enters as a whisper, almost blending with the air itself. When the bells stopped ringing, the world seemed to hold its breath. The words settled gently, like dust floating toward the ground. Nothing moves quickly here. Nothing arrives with force. The chaos that once tore through streets and homes has eased into a quiet so complete it feels almost suspended. The edges of life soften. The spaces between sounds grow wider. What remains is an unmoving calm, steady and unhurried. Beneath the narration, a single deep inhale rises, a slow, steady sound that drifts through the background like a wave rolling toward shore. It guides the listener's body without instruction, a simple suggestion that the air itself is settling into rest. Smoke from the last pyres curls upward, thin and pale, its trails blending into the morning fog. There is no fire left, only the final wisps of what once burned. They drift without direction, disappearing into the grey, as if returning to the sky. In this moment, the world is neither grieving nor healing. It is simply quiet. A silence shaped by the passing storm, holding space for what comes next. The deserted towns. A few quiet harp notes begin to drift through the air, light, unhurried plucks, spaced far apart, as if each sound is placed gently on the ground before dissolving into silence. They do not try to fill the space, they simply echo softly, like a memory moving through the wind. Beyond the faint music, the first sight of the deserted towns emerges with a calm, almost tender stillness. Small villages rest beneath a thin layer of dust, their narrow streets lined with fallen leaves that gather in soft piles along stone walls. The leaves rustle only when the breeze passes through, making a sound so light it feels more like a sigh than movement. Doorways sit slightly open, not from force, but from time. Wood, swollen by changing seasons, hinges loosening in the quiet. They creak gently, not as warnings, but as soft reminders of lives once carried through them. Windows hold reflections of pale sky, their glass dimmed by days of stillness. The market square slept beneath the dust of forgotten days. The words float like a slow breath, settling across the empty stalls and silent fountains. The square does not feel abandoned. It feels as though it has simply paused, resting after a long, weary chapter. The sun touches the stone pavement with a muted warmth, as if careful not to disturb anything. In some towns, 8 of every 10 souls had vanished. The narrator speaks this truth with the same softness as the harp, not to alarm, but to acknowledge the depth of the quiet that remains. The emptiness becomes a gentle echo of what once was, not a scar, but a space where echoes have slowed to a hush. Here and there, a cart still stands by a wall, its wheels covered in dust, its handles leaning slightly to one side. Fabrics left in open baskets have faded into pale shades, but nothing feels cold or harsh. Time has moved over everything with a soft, even hand, smoothing edges and stilling movement until the town resembles a place caught in a long, peaceful slumber. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper, repeating with thoughtful calm, "No laughter, no cart. Only the hush of time itself." Each phrase lingers for a moment before it melts into the air. The repetition does not emphasize absence, it emphasizes stillness, the kind that comes when a place has finally stopped running, stopped fearing, stopped struggling. The hush feels less like loss and more like a deep exhale. Grass grows between the stones of the path, slender and bright. Ivy climbs slowly along the corners of empty homes. Nature does not rush to reclaim the space. It merely fills it with quiet companionship, as though keeping watch. The harp continues its soft pattern, each note like a drop of light falling into the silence. And the towns, though empty, feel peaceful, held in a gentle pause, wrapped in the calm that follows exhaustion, resting in the arms of time. Roads and fields reclaimed. The background shifts almost imperceptibly. The distant hush of wind grows a little fuller, brushing through open spaces with a soft, steady breath. From somewhere far off, a single birdsong rises, light and unhurried, as if nature is testing its voice after a long silence. Another bird answers faintly, and the two sounds drift like threads of morning weaving through the air. The narrator speaks in the same calm rhythm, each sentence falling with the ease of a slow inhale and exhale. Grass grew where footsteps once fell. Moss claimed the stones of old walls. These words settle gently onto the landscape like dew. The earth, once pressed by hurried movement, now lies covered in a quiet green. Blades of grass curve over forgotten paths, rising through cracks worn smooth by countless journeys. They bend slightly in the breeze, peaceful in their steady return. Along the old roads, the change is even more visible. The once clear tracks that connected villages now lead into soft expanses of overgrowth. Edges blur, lines fade, until the roads seem like faint memories traced lightly across the land. Here and there, a wagon lies overturned, its wooden frame softened by time. Wildflowers bloom where goods once lay, their colours gentle, their petals opening without rush. Nature has taken her place not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. The land feels neither abandoned nor forgotten. It feels like a field left to rest after years of labour. The air carries a quiet sense of ease, as though every living thing understands that this stillness is part of a larger rhythm. Crops went untended, yet the earth was not cruel. She simply rested. The narrator offers this thought the way one might offer a leaf to the wind, simple and sincere. Harvests did not come, but the soil beneath remained calm. Fields that once echoed with voices, tools, and footsteps now lay open beneath the sky, wrapped in a gentle pause. Short, even sentences follow. Soft, measured, rhythmic. Bushes grow where fences once stood. Roots spread in loosened ground. Branches reach into quiet air. Each line moves like a breath, present, restful, unforced. Birdsong becomes a little warmer, a little closer, not lively, just natural, as if the world is remembering how to sing. Small creatures move through the grass with careful steps. Their presence is subtle, blending into the soft murmur of wind and leaves. The fields hold a peaceful weight, as if all things are settling into balance again. Empty spaces feel full, not with movement, but with stillness that nourishes. The roads, though leading nowhere now, stretch quietly under patches of shade, embracing their new place in the calm landscape. Nature does not rush. She moves with patience, letting each sprout find its own time, each stone grow its own coat of moss. The land breathes in long, slow rhythms, and the listener is carried gently within them. Life, quiet and unhurried, returns. Not with noise, not with urgency. Only with the soft persistence of green. Homes without voices. A faint wind slips through the crack of an old window, moving with a calm that carries no urgency. It brushes against the wooden frame, and the soft creak that follows sounds less like strain and more like a quiet yawn from a house long at rest. The breeze wanders through empty rooms, touching corners where shadows settle in patient stillness. Everything feels unhurried, as though time has slowed its steps to match the gentle hush of the world outside. The narrator's voice rises like a breath carried on the wind, low and barely above a whisper. Behind shuttered doors, dust lay like a blanket over memory. The words unfold with ease, settling across the quiet spaces of these resting homes. Dust gathers on windowsills, softening the edges of once bright colours. It drifts over tables where hands once worked, over floors worn smooth by familiar footsteps. Nothing feels abandoned, Everything feels paused, wrapped in a calm that holds the echo of moments now tucked gently into the past. Small objects rest where they were last placed, untouched, yet oddly peaceful. A child's toy sits on a stone step, its wooden shape, smoothed by use, now facing an open sky without moving. Nearby, a cup sits on a table, half filled long ago, its surface reflecting the faintest shimmer of light. These objects do not feel lonely, they simply remain, carrying the quiet imprint of lives that once moved around them. The faint wind continues its wandering. It lifts a strand of straw from the floor. It stirs the edge of a curtain. It slips under the door and moves down the empty hallway. Its presence is gentle, like a visitor who knows not to disturb what has settled into calm. The narrator speaks again, their voice soft as the dust itself. There is absence here, but not fear. The emptiness within these homes feels more like rest than loss. Each room holds a quiet shape of what once was, a sense of presence without the weight of longing. The silence is full, not hollow. It holds the memory of laughter without echoing it. It carries the warmth of shared meals without reenacting them. The walls remember, but they do not ache. A wooden chair leans slightly near a window, touched by a faded beam of light. It seems as if someone once rose from it and simply never returned, leaving the chair to continue holding the posture of a moment. The table nearby is marked by small impressions from daily life, a knife scratch, a burn from a candle, a smoothed place where elbows once rested. These signs remain gentle, softened by time, as though the house itself has learned to breathe slowly. A whisper drifts through the narration, steady and calm. Even emptiness has a heartbeat. The idea settles into the space like a warm thread. The houses feel alive in their own quiet way, not through voices or movement, but through the soft persistence of existence. They are shelters that continue to stand, carrying the memory of those who once belonged to them. Outside, grass rises around the stones of the foundations. In some places, nature has eased its way inside, vines curling through cracks, small flowers blooming along the thresholds. The earth does not push or conquer, it simply arrives with its own quiet rhythm, filling stillness with soft signs of life. A factual whisper follows, gentle as the others. Some villages would never rise again, marked only by stones in the grass. The words are not heavy, they are spoken like a simple truth laid at the listener's feet. The stones stand as quiet markers, softened by moss and time, blending into the fields that now sway with calm certainty. They are not reminders of tragedy, they are landmarks of passage, symbols that the world once moved differently here. The wind continues its slow drift. The wooden beams give a muted sigh. The rooms rest peacefully. And in these homes without voices, the listener is invited not to grieve, but to feel the soft empathy that lingers in quiet places, an understanding that stillness too can hold its own gentle life. Nature's gentle return. The tone softens into something warmer, like the first hint of morning settling across the land. A faint stream begins to murmur in the distance, its flow steady and low, as if it has been whispering all along, simply waiting for the world to be quiet enough to hear it. From time to time, a bird calls, one note at first, then another, each spaced with long stretches of peaceful silence. The sound carries easily, as though the air has grown clearer. The narrator's voice returns with the same calm ease, resting lightly over the soft background. But the world does not stay silent for long. The words drift gently, neither urgent nor bold, just a simple truth carried on a warm breath. Stillness has settled for its season, but nature, patient and unhurried, begins to step forward again. Animals wander back into the spaces once filled with people. A deer moves through an old garden, placing its hooves carefully among plants, left to grow as they wished. It pauses beneath a leaning arch of roses, now wild, now reaching, and lowers its head to drink from a shallow pool left by last night's rain. Its movements are soft, unafraid, as if the garden has become a quiet sanctuary. Along the walls of a nearby home, vines lift themselves in slow spirals. They weave across the stones, slipping through cracks, reaching toward the windows. At the old church, where the bells hang motionless, green tendrils curl through openings in the stained glass. They rest there, filtering the light into gentle shades, turning the interior into a place where nature and architecture breathe together. The narrator continues in a whisper, touched with warmth. The fields went wild for a time, but in their chaos, beauty bloomed. The thought settles like sunlight on still water. Once tended soil now carries its own patterns, unexpected, effortless, serene. Tall grasses sway in unhurried waves, blossoms appear in corners where no one planted them, rising out of the quiet earth with a kind of soft confidence. The land is not reclaiming, it is simply continuing, following its gentle rhythm. Layer by layer, the imagery widens. The sky grows pale with dawn. A thin band of light touches the horizon. Its edges soften into gold before spreading across the empty fields. Sunrise falls over stone rooftops, the light catching on dew gathered overnight. It glides across pathways, illuminating blades of grass that bend in greeting. The warmth does not rush. It rolls forward slowly, letting each surface glow in its own time. Houses that once stood in shadow now hold a faint shimmer, as if acknowledging the return of day. Birds move through the air with easy flights, tracing arcs above rooftops and settling on quiet roof beams. Their wings make almost no sound. When they land, the world seems to sigh, not with sadness, but with acceptance, as though nature has gently stepped into the spaces left open, filling them with small, steady signs of life. A soft humming begins in the background, almost a human tone, almost a flute, woven so lightly into the air, it feels more like a presence than a melody. It wraps around the listener with quiet warmth, offering comfort without asking for attention. The hum rises and falls with the breeze, becoming part of the landscape itself. Sunlight deepens as the day continues to unfold. The stream brightens. Birdsong becomes a little clearer. Leaves catch the light and glow from within. The narrator's voice returns once more, drifting like a slow exhale. In the hush that followed, the world opened its hands. Not in triumph, not in sorrow, just in quiet renewal. The roads remain still, the homes remain quiet, but the land itself breathes with a soft steadiness. Nature's return is not dramatic, it is gentle, like a long-forgotten rhythm resurfacing in its own time. And in this calm shift from silence to life, the listener is carried from the memory of death into the warmth of renewal, naturally, softly, as if the earth itself is guiding them forward with a peaceful, patient hand. The breath of renewal, The background sound begins to settle, softening into a steady hum that feels almost like warm air resting against the skin. The faint textures of nature fall away one by one, until only a gentle heartbeat tone remains, slow and even, drifting beneath the quiet like a pulse carried through the earth itself. Nothing moves quickly. Nothing insists. The world seems to settle into a peaceful stillness that asks for nothing more than calm presence. The narrator's voice rises through that hush, soft enough to merge with the hum, as if carried on the last traces of fading wind. But even silence has seeds, and soon life begins again. The words linger with a weightless grace. They echo without force, only drifting outward as though the air is holding them carefully. After the line fades, the world rests in near silence. 10 long seconds pass. Then 15. The quiet deepens, gentle and unbroken, like a long-held breath shared between listener and land. In that quiet, the heartbeat tone continues, slow, patient, rhythmic, reminding the listener that stillness is not emptiness. It is simply a softer form of life. Gradually, subtle details begin to emerge. A thin column of smoke lifts from the chimney of a distant home, winding upward in a pale ribbon that blends into the sky. Its movement is unhurried, a sign of warmth returning in small measures, the first fire lit for living, not mourning, the first sign that hands have kindled something new. Another moment passes and the sound of a single footstep touches the path, light, almost uncertain. Then another follows, spaced far apart, as though someone is rediscovering the rhythm of walking through the world. The steps do not break the quiet. They join it, becoming part of the slow, steady awakening that spreads through the land. Doors open with a soft wooden sigh. A window is pushed slightly ajar. The faint clink of a pot or cup drifts from the interior of a house, carried through the opening like a memory resurfacing. There is no rush, no crowd, only the careful return of presence. Through the stillness, the hum deepens by a shade, not louder, simply warmer. It wraps around each new sound, guiding them into the calm landscape without disturbing the peace. Every detail appears in its own time, like small lights appearing along the horizon before sunrise. The narrator's voice returns in a tone as soft as the smoke curling upward. Even after long quiet, a world remembers how to rise. The words float outward, unforced, almost like a reflection sitting on the surface of a lake at dawn. They are not instructions, not promises, simply gentle observations of what slowly begins to take shape. In a nearby field, the first hands begin to clear a patch of earth. The motion is slow, measured, as though relearning the feel of soil between fingers. A small fire crackles softly inside the hearth of a cottage, its glow stretching across the floor in muted gold. Inside another home, a chair is set upright, a table wiped clean, a doorway swept free of leaves. Life returns in pieces, quiet, simple, familiar. The hum beneath it all remains steady, almost like a deep and peaceful breath echoing through the ground. It carries the sense that the earth itself is exhaling, easing the weight it has held for so long. Sunlight edges across the rooftops, tracing their lines with gentle warmth. The sky brightens without haste, and the world seems to open a little more with each passing moment. The heartbeat tone gradually fades until it becomes part of the air, blending into a spacious quiet that feels clear and welcoming. Just before the section ends, a single exhale drifts softly through the background, the slow, steady release of breath. It feels as though the land itself is letting go, settling into peace as new life begins to take shape. This breath carries the listener forward, guiding them gently toward what comes next. The soft unfolding of a world ready for renewal. The early stirrings of hope. A new dawn for the living. A new dawn for the living. Awakening from the long night. Dawn arrives with a delicate touch, almost hesitant, as though the sky is learning how to brighten again. Very soft birdsong drifts across the quiet land, each note spaced far apart, light enough to rest on the cool morning air. Behind it, slow rising strings begin to hum, thin at first, then gently widening, like sunlight unfolding across the horizon. The narrator's whisper floats in with the same warmth as that first light. Morning came again, gentle and golden. The words settle over the empty fields with a calm certainty. Pale gold spreads over the grass, stretching into spaces that have known only shadow for many months. The stillness remains, but its edges soften. What once felt heavy now feels touched by warmth, as though the world is beginning to remember itself. Light moves across rooftops and along the dusty paths. It slips into doorways left slightly ajar. It rests on stones that have grown cool and quiet through the long night. Nothing stirs quickly, yet everything feels subtly awakened, as if the land has been waiting for this single moment of colour. From within the homes, survivors begin to step out. Their movements are slow, cautious, shaped by months of fear and silence. They pause on their thresholds, letting the soft glow settle on their faces. Eyes blink against the brightness, adjusting not only to the light, but to the idea of it, to the gentle truth that morning has returned. The air carries a new scent. Not strong, not sudden, but unmistakable. The air smelled of life again. The narrator breathes. It smells of soil warming under sunlight, of dew evaporating with quiet determination, of distant trees releasing their first hints of green. The survivors draw these scents in carefully, as though afraid the moment might disappear if held too tightly. There is no cheer, no rush of movement, only a quiet amazement shared in silence. People look toward the fields, toward the pale sky, toward the simple possibility of the day. Their hearts, like the strings beneath the narration, rise gently, steadily. In this soft beginning, humanity awakens, not with celebration, but with a fragile, peaceful wonder. The long night is ending, and morning has finally found its way home. The search for one another. Light footsteps begin to echo softly across gravel, each one slow and deliberate, spaced with long moments of quiet in between. The sound is gentle, not urgent, more like a person rediscovering how to walk through a world no longer filled with fear. Beneath these steps, faint human voices drift from far-off places, layered like distant memories carried on the breeze. Some voices rise and fall, others fade quickly, but all remain soft enough to blend into the still morning air. The narrator's voice settles into this quiet soundscape, warm and unhurried. They called names across valleys, and sometimes an answer came. The words float out like ripples across a calm pond. For months, silence had been the only reply. Now, even the faintest answer, barely more than a whisper, felt like a light returning from a long distance. People stepped out into the open fields, their voices tentative at first, as though uncertain whether the land would listen. They called out to friends, to neighbours, to distant kin scattered by months of isolation. At the edge of one village, a man stood at a low stone wall and spoke a familiar name. The sound drifted down the empty road, passing shuttered windows and abandoned carts. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from a far bend, a soft reply floated back, thin but steady. He closed his eyes, letting the sound settle into him like warmth. Elsewhere, a woman moved slowly along a path bordered by overgrown brush. Her footsteps pressed lightly into the earth. She paused often, lifting her head to listen. When she finally heard a small group approaching, their voices faint but unmistakably human, she stood still until they came into view. They greeted her simply, not with embraces or cries, but with the quiet relief of people recognizing life in one another. Survivors were few. Many villages were still half empty, and some entirely so. The narrator acknowledges this gently in the same steady tone as the wind. Across the land, many places remained quiet. But even in the quiet, human bonds began to weave again. Families reunited in small clusters. A mother found her child with a neighbor who had kept watch. Brothers met at the edge of a field, standing silently together before taking the first slow steps home. Friends, once separated by fear and distance, recognized familiar voices before familiar faces. These moments were not dramatic. They were soft, steady, and full of quiet understanding. The wind carried the sound of subdued conversations, simple questions asked in low tones. "Are you well? How long have you stayed here? Did anyone else come through?" There was no rush to recount sorrow. People spoke only what they needed, trusting silence to hold the rest. What mattered most was the presence of another human being standing beside them. Near a small stream, two neighbors met unexpectedly. They sat on opposite sides of the water, facing each other in calm disbelief. For a long time, neither spoke. They listened to the trickle of water, the distant steps of someone searching, the muted hum of life beginning to gather again. When words finally came, they were simple. "It's good to see you, and you." The narrator breathes this truth with soft clarity. From the silence, threads of belonging returned. These threads were delicate at first, thin as the morning mist. But with each voice that called and each voice that answered, the weave grew stronger. People walked paths once travelled daily, now rediscovered with quiet reverence. They knocked on doors gently, unsure who or what they might find. Sometimes there was no reply, and they simply stood for a moment before moving on. Other times, a face appeared at the doorway, marked by sorrow, yet softened by recognition. As footsteps and voices continued to fill the air, the sense of companionship grew, not loud or jubilant, but warm, steady, and unmistakably human. The land, once filled only with the murmur of wind, now held the quiet music of people finding each other again. And in this tender reconnection, the long night loosened its grip. Humanity, cautious but hopeful, began to stitch itself back together, one name, one answer, one step at a time. Rebuilding hearth and home, A low crackling fire begins the soundscape, its soft pops and gentle warmth settling into the air like a slow heartbeat. Beneath it, the faint rhythm of hammering rises, light taps spaced evenly apart, calm and steady, as if reminding the world how to move again. The land listens quietly as people gather the strength to rebuild, and still the sun rose. Hands that once buried now began to build. The same fingers that had closed doors for the last time now lifted beams, brushed dust from stones, and tied ropes with slow, patient movements. Cottages that had stood silent were cleared of fallen branches. Walls were straightened, not hurriedly, but with deliberate care, as though the builders were learning the texture of hope through the wood itself. They worked without urgency, guided by memory and need, and still the sun rose. Across the fields, farms stirred back to life. Tools long untouched were lifted from where they rested. Soil turned again beneath steady hands, the earth breaking softly under the weight of effort. People planted seeds with quiet intention, placing each one into the ground as if offering a small wish. Gardens took shape where weeds had wandered freely, their rows growing neat and measured as the days unfolded. Seasons had shifted, but the rhythm of planting returned gently, and still the sun rose. Some homes were built anew from ruins. Stones were lifted from collapsed walls, brushed clean, and placed back into their old positions, like memories realigned with time. Roof frames creaked softly as they rose, settling into place with the ease of things that belonged. Fresh timber carried the scent of forests not far away, and chimneys rose brick by brick, promising warmth to come. Even in villages where only a few remained, new doorways opened quietly toward morning, and still the sun rose. Gardens began to bloom again. Sprouts reached through the soil, small and pale at first, then gaining color with each passing day. Herbs spread in tidy clusters. Young leaves unfurled like gentle breaths. Bees drifted between blossoms, tracing familiar paths as though guided by an instinct older than all sorrow. The land responded to every touch, accepting care with its own slow grace, and still the sun rose. Faint smoke curled from fresh hearths. The sound of fire rang soft through the air, offering comfort rather than heat alone. People gathered around their new homes, placing tools aside, letting the warmth settle into their bones. They cooked small meals, tended to simple tasks, spoke in low voices that carried easily through the quiet. The fire's glow painted every face in gentle gold, marking the quiet return of ordinary life, and still the sun rose. The narrator's voice drifts like a whisper, carried on steady breath. They worked, and the world began to breathe again. The words settle lightly, like dust illuminated by morning light. They are not triumphant, they are simply true. Work moved slowly across the land, an act of healing, of remembering, of grounding. Each repaired wall, each lifted beam, each planted seed shaped a world learning to steady itself once more, and still the sun rose. Paths between homes grew clearer. People walked them with cautious confidence, sharing tools, exchanging food, offering quiet help without being asked. The hum of human presence returned in gentle waves, steps on gravel, voices in the early morning, the soft sigh of doors opening and closing. Community began to take shape again, not loudly, but with quiet persistence. And still the sun rose. Night followed day, and day followed night, each one arriving with soft, predictability. The world settled into a gentle rhythm, soothed by repetition, nourished by small acts of rebuilding. In the glow of new hearths and the warmth of tended soil, life returned with steady grace, unhurried, unforced, simply unfolding. And still, the sun rose. The land waiting to be touched. A faint breeze glides across the open fields, carrying with it the soft rustle of tall grass swaying in long, unbroken waves. The sounds are distant and unhurried, small movements of a world settling into peace. No clamour, no rush, only the steady murmur of a land breathing beneath a wide, open sky. The narrator's voice enters with that same gentle rhythm, drifting like wind across new growth. There were fewer hands to work, yet the land was waiting, patient, forgiving. The idea settles easily, without concern or urgency. The land does not demand, it simply remains, broad fields stretching into the horizon, quiet hills resting beneath the sun, soil soft and full of promise. What once required many now stood ready for the few, offering itself in calm invitation. Farmland lay open and unguarded, its lines no longer rigid. Without constant tending, nature had stepped forward, filling the spaces gently rather than taking them back. Wildflowers grew along the edges of furrows. Grasses softened the shapes of fields. Small creatures moved freely through areas once shaped by many footsteps. The narrator whispers, a soft, factual layer woven into the quiet. Across the countryside, land spread wide and abundant, waiting for any hand willing to care for it. Those who remained found themselves the caretakers of spaces once shared by dozens, sometimes hundreds. Fields that had stretched beyond a family's reach now opened like vast green pages. The work was larger, yes, but the pace had changed. There was no pressure to produce as before, no crowded demands. Instead, there was a sense of quiet guardianship, of tending what had endured. People stepped into the fields with slow, steady movements. They learned the contours of land newly theirs, the slope of the hills, the softness of soil after rain, the paths where water gathered. They worked with a gentler spirit, guided not by expectation, but by a quiet desire to honor what survived. The narrator continues, voice soft as the grass. Each seed they placed was an act of remembrance and hope. Seeds touched the earth like small blessings, each one carrying a memory of the past and a wish for the future. Kneeling to plant became a moment of reflection, an acknowledgement of those who once stood beside them, and a promise to keep living in steady rhythm with the soil. The breeze answers softly, brushing over newly planted rows. Birds circle above, tracing loose patterns in the sky. The land absorbs each touch with patient acceptance. Work became more than survival. It became a way of mending both earth and spirit. With every furrow turned, every seed lowered into the ground, every small sprout rising under sunlight, the people who remained found themselves slowly restored. The fields were no longer sites of labor alone. They had become places of healing, where quiet effort met quiet reward. The land waited, open-armed and forgiving, and those who stepped forward to tend it found renewal in its gentle, steady embrace. The worth of work. A rhythmic lute pattern begins to form in the background, soft, rounded notes echoing in a slow, steady cycle. The sound feels like the movement of hands at work, lifting, placing, smoothing, resting. Each note falls into the next without hurry, creating a gentle tempo that mirrors the quiet labor spreading across the recovering land. The narrator's voice drifts in barely above a whisper, carried on the steady hum of the melody. For the first time, a worker could ask and be heard. The words flow like water over stone, soft and certain. There is no triumph in the tone, only a calm acknowledgement of a shift long in the making. The world had changed, and in its quiet aftermath, the value of a working hand had grown. Facts enter, like soft breaths, woven gently through the sound of the lute. Wages rose. Meals grew fuller. A man or woman could choose whom they served. Each statement falls with soothing rhythm, simple truths offered without weight or pressure. These changes did not arrive with noise, they unfolded like dawn appearing along the edges of a field, almost unnoticed until the light was already there. The narrator continues in a tone as even and steady as the earth itself. The old world loosened its grip quietly, gently, without anger. Feudal bonds that once held people in place began to relax. The structure remained for a time, but its edges softened. What had been rigid became flexible, and choices that once seemed distant drifted closer, within reach. The world did not break, it simply shifted, tilting slightly toward fairness with each passing season. In workshops and farmyards, people felt this change in subtle ways. A servant found freedom to seek better work. A ploughman received more grain for his family. A young apprentice chose a kinder master. None of these moments needed celebration. They were small steps, steady and grounding, like walking familiar paths at a new, unhurried pace. The narrator's voice deepens into a warm whisper, carrying the mantra that ties everything together. Hands became precious. Every hand, a heartbeat of the earth. The phrase returns like a calm tide, each repetition smoothing the mind, easing the body into rest. These hands, once unnoticed, once taken for granted, now held clear worth. Their presence shaped the fields, the markets, the homes. Their absence, months earlier, had left the world silent. Their return brought gentle renewal. Workers rose in quiet confidence, knowing the land needed them, and that others knew it too. Payment came with more respect. Food tasted fuller. Life, though still humble, felt more balanced. Their labor became more than duty. It became a form of gentle empowerment, held softly in the palms of those who shaped it. Again, the narrator breathes the mantra. Hands became precious. Every hand, a heartbeat of the earth. The lute continues its slow, steady rhythm. Work made sound, fairness made music. Nothing hurried, nothing strained. Only a world learning to breathe on its own, guided by the quiet strength of those who tended it. And in that soft, unfolding balance, the worth of work glowed like a warm ember. Steady, gentle, endlessly human. Gentle commerce and shared tables. A gentle hum drifts into the air, faint market chatter softened by distance, birds calling lightly from nearby rooftops, and the delicate clink of cups meeting in easy rhythm. Nothing is loud, every sound feels cushioned, wrapped in the calm of a world relearning how to gather. The narrator's voice arrives with the warmth of morning sun on wooden stalls. Local markets began to stir again. Small at first, only a handful of people, a few baskets, a few hopeful smiles, but enough to create the quiet pulse of trade returning. Under simple awnings, villagers arranged apples, herbs, small loaves of bread, pieces of cloth folded with care. They worked not out of urgency, but out of a desire to reconnect. Apples traded for cloth, bread shared for song. The soft rhythm lets the listener imagine gentle exchanges, the glide of hands meeting hands, the calm murmur of gratitude spoken in low tones. There is no bargaining, no sharpness in the air, only a shared understanding that life feels richer when it moves between people. Birds sweep overhead, landing along the edges of the stalls. Children sit on their heels, watching quietly. Neighbors pause to talk, placing small offerings into each other's hands. The narrator continues, voice steady and reassuring. Communities began to form again, not around fear, but around generosity. After so many months of closed doors and heavy silence, the sight of shared tables felt like a soft awakening. Someone offered a piece of fruit to a traveller. Someone else poured a drink for an old friend. People gathered not out of need, but out of the quiet comfort found in being close enough to hear another voice. Coins began to flow again, though slowly. Soft clinks as they touched wooden counters, the faint metallic sigh as they settled in cloth purses. But even more than coin, kindness passed between hands. A baker placed an extra roll in someone's basket. A musician played a gentle tune, not for payment, but because the moment felt ready for melody. The narrator whispers a factual thread, light as a breeze. Towns revived little by little, each exchange a small step toward wholeness. Every day the market grew a little fuller. More colours appeared in the stalls, more scents drifted through the air. More voices blended into the warm background, creating a soundscape that felt like the heartbeat of a gently healing world. In the midst of this calm rebirth, a quiet refrain settles like a mantra. What was lost found new form. The phrase repeats softly in thought, not as sorrow, but as transformation. Old ways softened, new customs bloomed. People learned to value what remained, shaping it into something simpler, kinder, and deeply human. Shared tables lengthened through open courtyards, meals stretched into peaceful afternoons, stories passed from one person to the next, like lanterns carried through dusk. The market, though humble, became a haven, a place of soft laughter, calm voices and gentle abundance. And within its steady rhythms, what was lost, truly, found new form. The heart of the village. A soft murmur rises in the background, low laughter carried across the breeze, children's voices drifting from some distant corner, and the gentle ring of a small bell marking the slow passing of time. Nothing presses forward, every sound feels cushioned, like footfalls on warm earth. The narrator enters with a tone shaped by memory and calm, describing a rhythm slowly reclaimed. Daily life began to weave itself back into the village. Meals simmered again in humble kitchens, the scent of bread drifting through open windows. Music returned in slow, careful notes, played not to celebrate loudly, but to remind the heart how to beat in gentle time. People gathered in doorways, sharing quiet stories while the evening light settled along the eaves. Where sorrow once slept, Song returned. The narrator whispers, the words flowing like a lullaby wrapped in old warmth. Prayer rose in soft breaths, not as pleading, but as reflection. A candle, lit at dusk, shimmered against the walls of small homes, its glow steady and warm. The village felt held, as though every flicker of flame carried a memory forward with tenderness. Children traced circles in the dust, their laughter floating like thin ribbons into the sky. Adults watched with calm eyes, grateful for movements so light, so familiar. Even the animals seemed to walk with quieter steps, as if honoring the new balance that had settled over the land. A harp melody fades gently beneath the narration, soft, drifting, cradling each sentence. The notes feel like hands smoothing linen, like the hush of night making room for rest. They danced softly, for the ground still remembered. Comes another whisper, carried with reverence. Even the simplest acts, passing a cup, tying a bundle of herbs, mending a garment, took on a quiet grace. People moved with a sense of continuity, as though life itself was leaning forward, inviting them back into its gentle circle. The heart of the village beat again, not loudly, not quickly, but with a steady warmth that folded itself around every home, every pathway, every shared moment. And in that softness, life and love found their way back to the center of all things. Top of form, closing, transition, the world breathes again. A gentle wind moves across the evening fields, brushing lightly against rooftops and quiet paths. Its touch is soft, rounding the edges of the day. Far in the distance, a single church bell sounds, slow, unhurried, its tone drifting through the cooling air like a final note settling into silence. The narrator speaks in a voice shaped by dusk, low and warm. And as dusk fell, smoke rose once more from 1,000 hearths. Proof that life had returned. The words drift upward like the smoke itself, curling gently into the deepening sky. Across the land, faint ribbons of grey rise from cottages and farmhouses, each one a quiet sign that warmth has found its way back into the world. Fires crackle behind closed doors. Meals simmer softly. Families sit together again, letting the peace of evening wrap around them like a shawl. The sound fades slowly, gently, until only the breath of the wind remains. Then, even that softens. 10 seconds pass in pure stillness, unbroken, steady, calming. The world feels held in the palm of quiet. At last, the narrator offers the final line of transition, almost a whisper. Hope had found a home, yet the story of change had only begun. The sentence settles like a feather brushing stone, light and lingering. Silence returns, wider this time, deeper, meant to cradle the listener in rest. 15 long seconds stretch out. A gentle chamber of quiet, inviting the mind to soften, and the body to settle, as the world breathes again. The wounds of the soul. The echo within. A single, low choir note rises into the air, long and steady like a horizon stretching into dusk. Beneath it, a heartbeat begins, slow, almost drowsy, pulsing around 55 beats per minute. The two sounds blend into one gentle hum, warm and spacious. inviting the world to grow quiet from the inside out. The narrator exhales softly before speaking, as if aligning breath with the listener's own. When the body healed, the heart remained quiet. The words float through the hum like a small ripple spreading across still water. They hold neither sorrow nor relief, just recognition, a gentle knowing. After the fields were tended and the towns rebuilt, a different kind of silence remained, one that lived not in the world, but in the chest. Survivors carried invisible weight. Empty chairs at tables, unspoken names in the air between conversations, moments when a familiar road felt suddenly enormous and hollow. Yet none of this was loud. It was a quiet ache, a soft presence woven into the rhythm of ordinary days. Candlelight flickered across faces at dusk, casting gentle shadows that moved like memories on the walls. People sat with their thoughts the way one sits with a sleeping child, carefully, tenderly, aware of the fragility in the room. Flames trembled, breath deepened, silence grew warm rather than cold. The choir note swells slightly, then eases. The heartbeat remains slow, patient. This inner stillness was not the sharp edge of grief, but the moment before tears, the space where emotion gathers without spilling, where the heart simply acknowledges what has been lost and what has continued. The narrator's voice lowers into a soft murmur. In that quiet, the world felt different. Not broken, not whole, just present. People learned to move gently through this space. A hand resting a moment longer on a door frame. A sigh shared between friends. A prayer whispered without urgency. A memory held without fear. The hush was not emptiness. It was a kind of listening. And as evenings deepened and candlelight touched familiar walls, the echo within each survivor softened, breathing slowly with the heartbeat beneath the choir's glow, preparing quietly for the healing still to come. The silence of loss. A gentle wind drifts through the soundscape, light and continuous, as though it has travelled a great distance to arrive here. Beneath it, a distant hum rises, soft and steady, resembling the sea heard from far away. It carries no urgency, only depth, a low vibration that holds the quiet weight of memory. The narrator's voice enters slowly, shaped by the hush around it. At night, they dreamed of those who had gone. Voices soft as the wind in the fields. The words fall one by one with long spaces between them. Spaces where the breeze moves through tall grass. Spaces where the sea hum seems to expand. Spaces that allow the listener to breathe with the rhythm of absence. Across the land, families were missing half their kin. Chairs sat untouched. Doors remained closed. Towns that once bustled felt open and thin, with the sound of footsteps echoing farther than before. The narrator lets the truth settle gently, tenderly, without weight. Some villages were only half full now, half lit, half spoken. No dramatization, only presence. Grief as a soft companion, sitting beside the listener. At night, when the wind touched the rooftops and the world grew still, survivors often found themselves whispering into the dark, as though speaking to the memories held in every stone. They asked the dark, "Why me?" The silence after this line stretches long, allowing the question to hang in the air like mist. No answer follows, only the wind. Only the sea-like hum rising and falling like a patient tide. This question was not one of despair, but of wonder. Why a certain hand remained warm when another had grown cold? Why a breath continued when another had slipped away? It was the kind of question that needed no voice, because even unspoken, the night understood. The narrator speaks again, voice low, drifting like a candle's glow. In this quiet, sorrow did not stand alone. It sat gently beside them like a companion who asked for nothing. People learned to move through their days with this quiet presence. The memory of those lost became a pattern woven through daily moments, a glance at an empty chair during supper, the feel of a familiar path beneath the feet, the warmth of a hand missing from one's own. The wind brushes against the soundscape again, soft and cool. Sometimes a laugh would rise unexpectedly, only to fall into silence. Sometimes a familiar scent would return, a certain bread baking, the smoke of a certain herb. People paused, breathed, and allowed the memory to settle without fear. The narrator continues, voice barely above a whisper. They carried their grief. Like a folded blanket, close, warm, quiet. There was no rushing through it, no forcing it away. Grief followed like a shadow at dusk, soft and elongated, walking at their pace. And though the world had begun to grow again, fields replanted, workshops reopened, markets humming, this inner landscape remained tender, a place of slow steps and gentle breaths. The wind and the sea hum merge softly, filling the silence. Grief here is not an empty room. It is the shared air between those who remain and those remembered. A quiet companionship, a presence that invites stillness rather than sorrow, and in that stillness the heart learns to listen, to what was loved and to what has yet to heal. Candles for memory. A soft crackle enters the air, the delicate sound of a single candle catching flame. Its small fire dances in place, steady but living, each flicker casting a warm glow over the quiet around it. Behind the crackle, a faint choral harmony hums, low and soothing, as if sung from the far end of a peaceful twilight. The narrator's voice comes slowly, wrapped in calm. In every village, candles burned. Not for mourning, but for memory. The line repeats itself with unhurried grace, like a flame leaning gently from side to side. In every village our candles burned, not for mourning, but for memory. The repetition settles into the listener, inviting breath to slow, eyelids to soften, thoughts to drift like warm smoke. As night fell across the recovering world, homes glowed softly, little pockets of light scattered across hills and fields. Each house lit a candle, placed on a windowsill or table, letting its warm shimmer gather in corners and across walls. These small flames became evening companions, calming the mind long before sleep, quietly holding what the heart could not yet speak. Families whispered names near the candle's glow. Not loudly, not sorrowfully, simply softly, the way one speaks in a sacred space. A mother touched the rim of a clay lantern. A child traced a shadow on the wall. A father sat quietly, letting the light reflect in his eyes. Grief did not disappear, but it softened, it warmed, it found shape in ritual. The narrator continues, voice like a slow exhale. The light became routine, and in that routine, comfort returned. Each night, as dusk spread across rooftops and the world settled, people lit candles as naturally as they would breathe. This small act, striking flint, shielding the first spark with a gentle hand, watching the wick catch, became a rhythm. A way of honoring without heaviness, a way of continuing without forgetting. Across villages the tradition grew. Some households placed one candle for each person lost. Others lit a single flame to honor them all, letting its glow fill the space once occupied by voices and presence. Children were taught to lower their voices near the candles, to move gently, to listen. Churches reopened quietly. No grand celebrations, no loud bells. Just open doors, benches cleaned, windows unshuttered. People entered with slow footsteps, holding candles in their palms, letting their light join the others set near the altar. Vigils formed, simple, steady gatherings where neighbors shared silence more easily than words. Communities stood in these warm-lit spaces, letting the glow wash over their tired faces. The choral hum deepens for a moment, then fades to a near whisper, mirroring the peace in these gatherings. The narrator offers a whisper-soft refrain. Each flame a heartbeat, each heartbeat a promise. The line drifts through the harmony, returning like a lullaby refrain. Each flame a heartbeat, each heartbeat a promise. Light became the symbol of what endured. Not the brightness of celebration, but the gentle, steady glow of remembrance. A warmth that acknowledged the past.
While guiding the steps into tomorrow.
People learned to sit near these small fires as if sitting with a friend. They found comfort in watching wax soften, in seeing shadows sway, in feeling warmth touch their hands. Even in the quiet, they felt accompanied, not by the lost, but by the memory of love itself. The narrator's voice slows further. The candles did not chase away the night. They simply softened it. And so each flame became a meeting place between what was gone and what remained. A bridge of warmth across the cool distance of loss. And night after night, as the ritual continued, grief transformed from something sharp into something round, calm, and gently glowing. In these tender lights, the world remembered, and through remembering began to heal. Dreams and art awaken. A single lute string hums in the distance, its note long and shimmering, like a memory held between two breaths. Beneath it, an ocean-like sound rises and falls, a slow, tidal breathing that rocks the listener in calm rhythm. Together they form the sense of something stirring quietly within the stillness.
The narrator's voice arrives with a slightly brighter warmth, a soft light dawning after long twilight.
From sorrow, beauty began to grow. The words glide over the gentle tide beneath them. They carry no sudden brightness, only the soft glow of something new unfolding where grief once lived. In the years following loss, survivors found themselves turning toward expression, toward the need to place memory into form. Songs began to echo through small halls once more, voices weaving low melodies that drifted like threads of comfort. These songs did not speak of triumph, but of presence, of love carried across time, of faces remembered with tenderness. Woodcarvers returned to their benches, shaping quiet stories into beams and door frames. They carved gentle figures, saints, animals, angels, yet even their angels held the features of real people, a sister, a friend, a neighbor who once walked the village paths. The narrator's tone softens into a poetic whisper. They painted angels, not of gold, but of faces they remembered. Frescoes bloomed on chapel walls, simple, imperfect, human. Soft colors brushed onto plaster became prayers made visible. Children appeared in these paintings not as ideal forms, but as they had lived, eyes bright with mischief or kindness. Families found comfort in recognizing familiar features among the painted figures, as though the lost had stepped quietly into a world of color. The distant lute string hums again, gentler this time, as if nodding to the creativity taking shape. People wrote too. Chroniclers sat at wooden tables with candles flickering beside them, pressing ink onto parchment in careful strokes. They did not write to recount tragedy alone, they wrote to understand it, to hold meaning in their hands the way one holds a warm stone. Their quiet reflections formed the beginnings of a new kind of thought, one that looked inward, seeking purpose, connection, understanding. The narrator adds a soft, factual whisper, woven lightly into the calm. In these tender acts of creation, the first stirrings of Renaissance thought began to rise. Not the grand Renaissance of later centuries,
but its earliest breath,
art as healing, creativity as remembrance, expression as a way to soothe the soul. People found peace in making things. A woman embroidered flowers onto cloth, each stitch a meditation. A farmer shaped clay pots in the evening to calm his hands. A child drew figures in soot on a wall, playful and serene. Beauty did not erase grief. It accompanied it. It softened the edges of memory and gave the heart a gentle place to rest. The ocean breath sound deepens, slow and steady. The narrator closes in a voice almost like a lullaby, and from the quiet chambers of the heart, dreams began to awaken. Soft, slow, shaped by love. And in those small acts of creation, hope rose again, not with brilliance, but with the gentle warmth of dawn. The healing of understanding. A soft wave-like breathing begins to rise, slow and even, as though the sea itself has curled close to listen. Beneath it, faint metallic tones shimmer, bell-like, delicate, echoing with the quiet clarity of thought, awakening gently. Their presence is subtle, like distant wind chimes, stirred by a passing breeze. The narrator speaks in a warm, maternal softness, each phrase shaped with the calm care of hands smoothing linen. Pain taught compassion. Fear taught care. The words float, unhurried, carried by the tide-like breath beneath them. In the years after the Great Sickness, people began to understand that saving others required gentleness, not panic, patience, not withdrawal. They saw that kindness could be a form of protection, that love could become a shield. And so they turned their grief into learning, their worry into new ways of tending life. The faint metallic bell tones flicker again, like tiny sparks of insight appearing and dissolving. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper, soft as folded cloth. 40 giorni, 40 days. The phrase lingers with a soothing rhythm, almost like a cradle rock. Towns had begun to ask travellers to wait near their gates, not as punishment, but as a gesture of care. The first quarantines grew from this quiet understanding that time and distance could protect the fragile threads of life. They didn't call it science then, they simply called it kindness. Families who tended the sick washed their hands in warm water, not because of knowledge from books, but because it felt like a cleansing of sorrow and worry. They opened windows to let air pass through rooms, imagining it carried away the heaviness. They learned to separate gently, placing beds farther apart, arranging meals outside doorways, speaking softly through shutters. The narrator offers a tender line. They called it caution. We might call it tenderness. The wave-like breath deepens, slow and steady, as though the world inhales the meaning. Communities work together with quiet intention. Neighbours checked on one another from a distance, leaving baskets of food on steps. Children stayed indoors, not from fear, but because their parents held them close, whispering stories until the danger eased. Priests and healers walked with measured steps, learning how to soothe without touching, how to comfort without gathering. Knowledge grew in this time, not from grand discoveries, but from noticing, observing patterns in breath, in warmth, in recovery. People learned to listen to the body's subtle signals, to the needs of the sick, to the soft warnings carried on the wind. What began as instinct slowly became wisdom. The narrator's tone remains gentle, each word a slow exhale. Compassion taught them to wait. Love taught them to learn. And from this learning came the foundations of care that would echo through centuries. Simple acts, washing, waiting, separating, tending, became threads of understanding woven through every home and lane. The metallic chime rings once more, barely audible, as though acknowledging the birth of awareness. In the stillness that follows, the narrator concludes, in every cautious breath there was kindness, in every gentle choice there was healing. And so knowledge grew not as a flame but as a quiet light, held lovingly in the hands of those who wished to protect life. The soul remembers and rests. A low choir hum drifts into a single sustained note, long and steady like a thread of twilight stretched across the sky. Beneath it, slow breaths rise and fall, quiet and even, as though the world itself has learned to breathe again. The narrator speaks with a tender calm. The sorrow did not vanish. It settled like dust in sunlight. The words glow softly in the air, neither heavy nor sharp, just present, drifting as lightly as the tone beneath them. Communities moved forward with this presence resting beside them. Memories, no longer overwhelmed, they simply lived in the quiet corners of each home, in the pauses before dawn, in the hush that followed evening prayer. People learned to carry what remained, not as weight, but as a part of the rhythm of living. The voice continues a little slower, like a gentle hand guiding the moment. They did not forget. They simply carried it gently, and life unfolded around that gentleness. Stories were shared in whispers, names spoken with soft affection, and silence held without fear. Each memory found its place, like a stone set carefully along a path. The world was different, but the difference was tender. A breathing cue begins to weave into the ambience, subtle, natural. Inhale, 2, 3, 4.
Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
The sound of breath blends with the sustained note, forming a calm cycle, steady and patient. Villagers tended fields again with quiet intention. Families gathered around warm hearths. Children played in softened laughter, mindful of the world their elders remembered. Every moment contained both past and present, held together without struggle. The narrator's voice lowers to a murmur, soothing, unhurried. Some memories stayed bright. Some grew faint, but all were honored. Another breath cue drifts in. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The pace invites the listener's body to settle, to find its own gentle ground. And finally, the narrator offers a closing whisper, like a blanket drawn slowly across the evening. The soul remembered, and in remembering, it found its rest. The sustained choir note softens, fading into a breath that feels like dusk, settling over quiet fields. Nothing ends. Nothing is lost. Everything simply becomes still and peaceful and completely at ease. The breath of tomorrow. The ocean's hum begins to fade, withdrawing with the softness of a tide, returning to its deepest sleep. In its place, the faintest morning birds call from far away, thin, gentle notes that drift like pale light over the horizon. Night loosens its hold, and the air brightens by quiet degrees. The narrator speaks with a calm that feels like the first warmth touching the earth. And as night gave way to morning, the world exhaled at last. A long, effortless breath seems to pass through the land, as though every tree and stone had been holding it through the long dark. With that release, the hush of dawn settles softly across all that survived. The narrator continues, voice low, steady, tender. From the wounds of the soul came the roots of mercy and the quiet wish. Never again. No urgency sits within the words, only reflection, shaped by the gentle spaces between them. The world has learned something in its stillness, something it carries forward like a seed tucked into the soil of a new season. Mercy, patience, care, all rising from the silent lessons left behind. The birds grow a touch clearer, then soften again as though acknowledging the moment before stepping back into the hush. A faint echo of waves returns, not strong enough to stir, only enough to cradle. The sound stretches into a long pause, spacious and easy. 15, 20 seconds of stillness. A place for the listener to rest,
to breathe,
to settle. And in that quiet, the path opens toward the next dawn of thought. 145 to 165. Faith, fear, and the rebirth of thought. The soft tremble of belief. A faint binaural breeze moves from left to right, slow and cool, as though drifting through an open window at dawn. Beneath it, a gentle pattern of breathing rises and falls, calm even, carrying the listener from ear to ear, like the world inhaling on one side and exhaling on the other. When the narrator speaks, the voice is very low, almost merging with the breath itself. Faith had carried them through the dark.
But dawn brought questions.
The words settle softly, without tension, like petals falling onto still water. Faith had been the lantern that people held close through the long night, something steady when everything else trembled. Prayers had soothed shaking hands, rituals had given shape to days that felt endless. In the heaviest hours, belief was simply a place to rest. But when the world grew quieter and sunlight returned to doorsteps, something gentle began to shift. In the calm, people felt space open inside themselves, space where new thoughts could move slowly without fear. The narrator's voice drifts like a warm breeze.
They still prayed.
But their prayers sounded different now. There was gratitude in their whispers, but also contemplation, a new kind of softness. Instead of asking for deliverance, some asked for understanding. Instead of pleading for protection, they offered quiet thanks, and in those subtle changes a new rhythm of belief emerged, less desperate, more mindful, shaped by the lessons they carried. Some stood at dawn with hands folded loosely, feeling the morning light rest on their faces. Others stepped into fields, letting silence answer their questions. A few simply sat by open windows, breathing slowly, trusting that the world was healing and that they were healing with it. Faith did not vanish. It simply breathed. It expanded, softened, opened. The narrator continues in a whisper anchored by the passing breeze. They listened. Not just upward, but inward. This gentle inward listening became its own kind of prayer, one that came not from fear, but from reflection. People felt the tremble of belief changing shape, becoming something calm and personal, something that carried both the memory of darkness and the quiet warmth of morning. And as the binaural wind drifts once more from left to right, belief settles softly, not as certainty, but as peace. When fear begins to fade. A distant bell rings far away, so soft it feels more like a memory than a sound. Its echo drifts gently across the space, and beneath it, a slow binaural vibration shifts almost imperceptibly from left to right, like a cautious step into the morning. The ambience carries no urgency, only the sensation of something loosening, uncoiling, releasing its hold. People had lived for so long inside the shadow of fear that it had become their only compass. Every thought, every breath, every gesture shaped by its quiet command. But the world was changing. The sky was wider, the air steadier, the nights less heavy. And slowly, fear began to soften at the edges.
The narrator's voice rises with a gentle certainty, barely above a whisper.
Fear had been their only compass, but now new stars began to appear. These new stars were not literal lights, but small signs, a shared laugh, a door left open, a child daring to wander a few steps from home. They were the beginnings of something inward, curiosity returning, the mind lifting its head after a long season, bowed low. In the evenings, villagers gathered around quiet fires. The flames crackled softly, warm but not wild, their glow drawing people into small circles of connection. They talked in gentle voices, letting stories unravel slowly. Some spoke of what they had seen, others simply listened. They asked questions they once feared to shape. What happened? How did we survive? What do we do now? There was no urgency in their conversations, only the steady rhythm of people thinking aloud together, their minds no longer frozen. The firelight painted soft shapes across their faces, revealing a calm focus, a shift from being carried by events to observing them. Where once every sound felt like a warning, now the silence felt like a balm. The quiet was not emptiness, it was healing. It wrapped itself around tired spirits the way a soft blanket wraps a child. In this silence, hearts slowed, breath deepened, and thoughts began to rise gently from within, like lanterns lifting into the night.
The narrator continues, tone warm as embers.
They had lived so long in reaction, but slowly they learned to witness.
Observation replaced panic. Reflection replaced dread. People watched the changing seasons with new eyes, how the fields recovered, how the sky held its color. They noticed small details again, the soft bend of wheat in the wind, the pattern of ripples in a stream, the way a candle's flame leaned toward a draught.
Even fear itself changed shape. It no longer ruled. It simply rested in the corner of the mind, quiet, acknowledged, no longer overwhelming. The binaural hum shifts gently, creating a sense of lift, of clarity emerging. People felt their minds waking up, slowly, like dawn unfolding across a hill. Not sharp, not sudden, just a gradual settling into understanding. They no longer braced for catastrophe. They leaned into presence. And in that presence, thought returned, soft, patient, luminous. Not to erase fear, but to guide the world forward. With quiet, steady steps. The gentle birth of questions. A delicate rustle drifts through the quiet, paper shifting, a page being turned with careful fingers. Beneath it, the soft tap of a quill touches wood, steady and unhurried. These sounds mingle with a slow storytelling rhythm, like gentle waves moving through the mind, guiding the listener into a space where thought awakens without stirring the heart too strongly. The narrator's voice enters in a whisper, warm and unintrusive. They still prayed, but also began to ask. The words glide slowly into the air, settling with the softness of dust on a beam of morning light. They are not a challenge, not a rebellion, only the natural unfolding of curiosity after long darkness. Faith remained a steady companion, but now another companion walked beside it, the quiet desire to understand. Survivors began to look more closely at the world around them. Healers watched the body with new attention, noticing small changes, how breath shifted, how skin warmed, how recovery came or didn't. Their hands moved gently, their eyes thoughtful, their hearts steady. Each pattern they recognized opened another door inside their minds. In monasteries, monks bent over parchment, copying observations in slow, careful strokes. They wrote not to oppose belief, but to support life. In cramped script, they traced the rise and fall of fevers, the paths of symptoms, the timing of illness. Their ink carried the first suggestions of continuity, of connection, of cause and effect. Across towns and roads, merchants returned from distant places with stories. They spoke softly of similar sicknesses in other lands, of winds that carried change, of ships arriving with cargo and whispers. Their words spread through markets like gentle ripples, adding pieces to a puzzle no one yet knew they were assembling. The narrator continues, voice like a hand, smoothing cloth. Curiosity did not arrive in a single moment. It came in small breaths, in observations left quietly by the door of thought. People began to wonder about the natural world, about air and water and movement. They noticed that illness sometimes followed travel, that it lingered in crowded streets, that it faded in open fields. These thoughts were not sharp. They were soft, forming slowly, like dew gathering on leaves before dawn. Natural causes, patterns, reasoning shaped like a lullaby. Early rational thought appeared as gently as a seedling pushing through soil, not loud, not demanding, just present, quiet, patient. It grew beside faith rather than against it, each supporting the other in a new balance. The quill scratches again, faint and rhythmic, as though marking the heartbeat of understanding itself. Healers compared notes.
Monks shared scrolls.
Merchants exchanged murmured tales in shaded stalls. Little by little, the world's questions found voices. People still prayed at sunrise, still bowed their heads in evening light. But after the prayer, they lingered. They watched. They wondered. They listened to the wind, to their neighbors, to the subtle truths tucked inside everyday life. And the narrator closes soft as drifting ink. They sought comfort in heaven and clarity on earth. In this tender harmony, new thought was born. Not as a blaze, but as a gentle glow, guiding the mind into a quiet, curious dawn. A candle of curiosity. A warm hum settles in the background, deep and steady, vibrating softly like sound carried through the chest. The binaural tone drifts slowly to the left, creating the sensation of leaning gently toward a source of comfort. It is a sound that glows rather than sings. From within that glow, the narrator speaks with a calm that feels almost like breathing. Perhaps fate was not a chain,
but a path.
The words arrive as lightly as air, shaped without urgency, as though they have been waiting for a quiet moment to be heard. People had lived so long believing their lives were held by forces far beyond their understanding. But now, with the world calmer and sadness settling into memory, a new thought began to rise, small, soft, but steady. They wondered whether fate might be something they could walk with, not bow to, something they might guide with gentle hands. Not control entirely, but share in, like walking beside a river and choosing where to place one's steps along its edge. In towns recovering from silence, small councils began to form. Nothing grand, just neighbors gathering around tables, speaking in low tones, sharing what they had witnessed. They wrote their observations in simple lists: who had fallen ill, what had helped, when the winds changed, how the seasons moved. Patterns emerged in these quiet notes, not sharp enough to startle, but clear enough to comfort. The narrator's voice moves like a warm draft. One quiet thought became another, and 1,000 small ideas warmed the cold world. These ideas were not loud revelations. They were more like candles lit one by one, each flame offering a little more clarity, a little more ease. A healer shared her careful watch over fevers. A merchant spoke of changes seen in distant ports. A monk contributed pages of quiet records. Little by little, the glow spread. People felt their minds soften open, as though the world were inviting them to understand it gently. The thought that destiny might bend, even slightly, under the weight of learning, brought a subtle lift to their spirits. Light enough for night, but but bright enough to guide. The hum deepens, wrapping the listener in warmth, and in that warmth, curiosity flickers. Not as a spark to awaken, but as a candle to soothe glowing softly in the doorway, between faith and thought. The mind slowly awakens. A rhythm like the ocean's breath rises in the background, slow, steady waves inhaling and exhaling against the shore. The sound carries thought in and out, calming the mind while giving it space to drift, expand, and settle again. The narrator enters with a softness shaped by the tide, thought returned like a tide. Soft, steady, patient. After the long years of shadow, people began to look outward once more. They watched how the sky shifted from dusk to dawn, how clouds traced gentle paths across the day. They observed the way seasons moved, how cold sank into soil and warmth lifted it again. These simple observations were not yet science, but they held the beginnings of it. Quiet, curious steps toward understanding. In small villages, a kind of micro-rebirth unfolded. A man sat by a field sketching the shape of the horizon. A woman noted when the first frost came and when it faded. Elders told stories flavored with reflections, not just memories. Children listened with wide, calm eyes, sensing a new rhythm in the world around them. Communities began forming simple rules: how to care for one another, how to protect their wells, how to keep records of seasons and harvests. Nothing strict, nothing grand. Just shared understanding, shaped slowly by experience. These early guidelines felt like the first threads of a new order, woven gently from watching, listening, and learning. The ocean breath ambient swells and softens as though agreeing. What began in single hearts soon moved through entire villages. What began as a personal awakening became a communal one. And in that shared awakening, the world quietly prepared itself for a new age of thought, not sudden, not loud, but rising patiently like a tide, finding its way back to shore. The dawn of understanding. A wide binaural field opens gently, stretching like a soft horizon. The space feels larger now, the way morning air expands after a long night. A faint breeze moves through it, carrying the pale colors of dawn, subtle, cool, full of quiet promise. The narrator speaks in a voice light as breath itself. Fear had ruled the night, but thought would guide the morning. The words glide into the open air, unhurried, settling with the ease of first light resting on rooftops. Nothing sharp remains, only calm understanding, balanced and steady. A whispered line follows, shaped like a lullaby drifting towards sleep. They still prayed, but now they also understood.
The breeze softens.
The space widens once more. Then a long pause, 10-15 seconds of pure stillness, like the world holding its breath in gentle gratitude. In that silence, something new begins to stir. Light, hopeful, unforced.
The narrator returns with a quiet closing murmur, lowering like the final note of a hymn.
And from this calm awakening, a new beginning waited. Simple, patient, already growing. The seeds of tomorrow. The first colors of renewal. A faint breeze moves through tall grass, brushing softly from ear to ear. Birdsong begins in small, delicate notes, the kind that arrive before the sun fully rises. Under it all, a heartbeat hums, slow and steady, like the earth waking with care. The narrator speaks with a warm, morning whisper. Morning touched the world again, and something within it began to bloom. Light spreads gently across empty fields, sliding over rooftops that had rested in shadow for too long. It moves across stone walls, over quiet paths, across the edges of distant trees. Villages that once felt hollow now hold the soft glow of a new beginning. Not loud, not sudden, only a quiet easing into brightness. The air feels lighter, as if every breath meets less resistance. The sky seems clearer, washed gently by the night that came before. What was once muted now brightens, shade by shade. The narrator continues, voice drifting like sunlit mist. Fields grew green again, and so did hope. Grass lifts its first blades, touched by warmth. Windows catch the morning glow. The world, still healing, leans softly toward life once more. And in these first colors of renewal, the day opens its arms, calm, bright, and full of quiet promise. The return of hands and heart. Soft footsteps press into the earth, slow and careful, as though relearning the rhythm of living. Far away, a wooden saw whispers through timber, its sound gentle, unhurried. Birdsong flutters above it all, light, familiar, warm. The narrator speaks with a voice as calm as morning shade. They rebuilt not just with timber and stone, but with gentleness. People returned to the places they once stood, carrying quieter hearts and steadier hands. Merchants stepped onto old roads, their carts rolling softly over paths that remembered them. Craftsmen opened the doors of their workshops, brushing dust from benches, touching tools that had waited in silence. Storytellers wandered back to village squares, letting their voices drift into open air once more, low, patient, comforting. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. Every action moved like a breath drawn with care. Shops reopened, not with clamour, but with quiet greeting. Markets revived, not in noise, but in gentle exchanges. Trade and craft returned as if rising from a long, peaceful sleep. And the narrator offers a soft refrain, barely above the rustle of leaves. What had fallen asleep slowly awakened. Hands found purpose again.
Hearts found warmth again.
And together, people and the world rebuilt each other. Quietly, beautifully, side by side. The gentle bloom of art. A whisper of silk brushes the air, light and flowing. Charcoal glides across paper in soft strokes, each line barely louder than a breath. Somewhere nearby, a delicate instrument plays, notes drifting like dust in a sunbeam. The narrator speaks, wrapped in calm. In the quiet, creativity found space to breathe. And it did. After years when hands could do nothing but survive, they began to shape beauty once more. Painters lifted their brushes, letting new colours settle on fresh canvases, tones gentler than before, touched with prayer instead of sorrow. Musicians wrote melodies that rose like soft incense, not mourning the past, but blessing what remained. Woodcarvers traced small figures into warm grain, their knives moving slowly, lovingly. Scribes reopened their books, copying words with care, letting knowledge flow back into the world like a returning river. None of it was grand yet. None of it sought to astonish.
It was simply the world remembering how to make beauty.
The narrator continues, voice drifting like morning mist. Ideas opened like petals, slowly, softly, in the morning light. And so they did. Quiet inspirations taking shape, tender and new. The earliest stirrings of a different age, a gentle, blooming, beautiful, and serene. The spirit of humanism awakens. A quiet wind curls through a line of trees, bending leaves in slow waves. Beneath it, a heartbeat hums, so softly, so slowly, it feels almost like stillness. A calm space where thought can rise without stirring the body. The narrator speaks with a voice light as drifting air. They began to see the world not through fear, but through wonder. People looked at the sky with new eyes, noticing shapes of clouds, paths of birds, the way morning light rested on fields. They wrote these things down in simple notes, tracing small truths with patient hands. They watched nature not as a threat, but as a teacher, steady, generous, open. Their faith remained quiet and steady, but a new companion walked beside it. The narrator whispers, "Faith stayed," but curiosity walked beside it. In this gentle partnership, people discovered the value of every life, every thought, every quiet moment. They spoke more softly to one another, listened more carefully, allowed themselves to wonder. And so, thought itself awakened, like a child opening its eyes. The wind softens again, the heartbeat slows once more, and the world feels wide, alive, and deeply at peace. A world ready to breathe again. A gentle wind moves through the quiet, warm and low. Beneath it, a soft, earthy vibration rises.
As if the ground itself releases a long, peaceful breath.
Life returns without fanfare, without noise. It comes the way dawn comes, simply because it must. The narrator speaks with deep pauses, planting each word like a seed. The Black Death ended, but life never left. A faint hush follows, the soundscape lowering, smoothing into calm. The world rests in its new stillness, ready for the final fade, into pure, effortless peace. The long fade into sleep. Only sound remains now. A slow ocean breath rising and falling, blending with a faint, wandering breeze that moves like a lullaby through the dark. No voice guides the moment. Only the soft echo of waves, the hush of air, carrying the listener deeper, farther, quieter. The world narrows to rhythm, inhale, exhale, a shoreline of calm that drifts just beyond thought. Little by little, the volume thins, fading like night, settling over open water. For long, unbroken minutes, the ambient tide continues, steady enough to hold, gentle enough to let go. and sleep arrives without needing to be called.